This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the lengthy conversation between Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim to his companion and confidant, Hisham ibn al-Hakam. And I think today, inshallah, it's very, very lengthy. We won't conclude it. I think today will end at least our portion of the conversation, inshallah. And if you recall, just as a summary, he begins by defining the intellect and talking about the people of intellect and about the importance of particularly reflecting upon the natural signs that surround us, from the sun to the moon to the stars to the oceans and to the rivers. And I wanted to take a look at a couple of lines that he utters to Hisham ibn al-Hakam, which are a little bit more practical with regards to their approach in terms of how we can be the individual who perfects the intellect. And if you recall, when we talk about al-aql, we see it as the driving force of the soul, going back to that, because that's the fundamental sort of importance of this conversation in the first place, that if we have perfected our intellect, if we have perfected this gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, by which we can perceive Him and know Him and thus know ourselves, then we can control our desire, we can control our anger, we can control our power of imagination and otherwise. But it starts again with this foundation, whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted us this intellect, and our job and responsibility now is, of course, to reflect and to perfect it. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these lines as he utters to Hisham. Again, Hisham ibn al-Hakam, who was one of his close confidants and students. He states, Ya Hisham, إن لقمان قال لابنه تواضع للحق تكن أعقل الناس يا بني إن الدنيا بحر عميق قد غرق فيه عالم كثير فلتكن سفينتك فيها تقوى الله. He says, O Hisham, surely Luqman, of course, this personality within the Qur'an, the entirety of chapter 31 of the Qur'an is named after Luqman, who some would argue perhaps that he's a prophet, though other sort of opinions suggest that he was just a pious man, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved to present his example within the Qur'an. He says that surely Luqman told his son, Tawada lil haq takun a'qal an-nas, that be humble toward the truth and you will be the most intellectual of people. You will have the biggest intellect. So when you see truth, don't pass judgment. Don't say, but I learned it this way. I was taught it this way. Accept it and embrace it, that you may be wrong in the way that you understood something. And he tells him, Ya bunay, this line is very important. He states, Ya bunay, again, Imam Musa al-Kadhim is telling Hisham, quoting Luqman, Ya bunay, inna ad-dunya bahrun amiq qad ghuriqa fihi alimun kathir. He states, oh my son, surely this world is a deep ocean, where surely many knowledgeable people have drowned within it. The important line that he states, or the important word, is that he states that many knowledgeable people have drowned in it. Because there's a difference. If you recall from a couple of days ago, I gave the example about when the Prophet ﷺ, he exited his home and he saw this sort of genealogist who was giving all of this information, to which the Prophet ﷺ says, what is going on over here? And they said, this is a big scholar, Allama, who is talking, to which the Messenger ﷺ said, why are you taking knowledge there? Come to me. Right? That's not the most knowledgeable person, the one who knows your genealogy. He said, I will be the one to take you out of darkness into light. Right? So he states that surely many knowledgeable people have drowned in this world, because you can have knowledge, but what is it void of? He tells us, فَلْتَكُنْ سَفِينَتُكَ فيها تقوى الله. That so allow for your ship in this deep ocean to be taqwa in Allah, God consciousness. So he's going to define for us again intellect. وحشوها الإيمان وشراؤها التوكل وقيمتها العقل ودليلها العلم وسكانها الصبر. He states it, on the ship with your oars be your faith. And may you have trust in God. And again, may you have this intellect. And may your direction be knowledge. And that which you reside upon, patience. So a couple of attributes that again redefine what intellect is according to Islamic tradition. Number one, God consciousness. Number two, faith. Number three, trust in God. Number four, knowledge. And number five, patience. All of that together is how we define this intellect, this power of intellect, which again is the guiding force and the guiding factor of the human soul. So Luqman defines it as something that has all of these characteristics. God consciousness, meaning you recognize and you feel the presence of God before you perform an action. While you're performing an action, before you perform an action, after you perform an action, you see God in it. قبله وبعده ومعه. Number two, faith. Because again, you can have knowledge, but knowledge is that which is in the mind, seemingly. Faith is that which is present within the heart, not in the physical, but again in the spiritual. To have trust in God and to submit to the decree of God when we ask questions like, why does God allow for X and Y and Z to take place? Why did this happen to me? All of the stems and can sort of influence, again, that power of imagination that we talked about, al-quwwat al-wahmiyya that we talked about some weeks ago. وَسُكَّانُهَا الصَّبْرُ, and patience. Sorry, knowledge and patience. So knowledge is not sufficient to be successful. Knowledge with God consciousness, with faith, with entrusting our affairs to God, and with patience. He continues. Does it make sense so far? يا هشام لكل شيء دليل ودليل العاقل التفكر. He states, oh Hisham, and for everything there is a guide. And the guide of this intellect is at-tafakkur, contemplation, which we talked about before. To think, to reflect, to meditate, to spend time alone, away, to remember God, to see God in the midst of every action. That when you look up again at the stars, when you look up at the sun and the moon, that you remember our size in relation to this vast universe that we live in. To think about our own mortality often, not in a way that's negative, but in a way that we recognize that's exactly where we're going. Why would you not prepare for somewhere that you're absolutely going to go? Why would you not even think about it? I think I gave this example some weeks ago, that if you decided you're going to come to study at New York University, more likely than not, you're going to read about it. You're going to see pictures online. Likely you're going to come and visit it. So just have an experience of what it's like, what it might be like. All of that's important. So when we know that we are someone who is destined for a world beyond this one, it's important for us to think about it. ودليل العاقل التفكر ودليل التفكر الصمت. And the guide for contemplation is silence, meaning not talking all the time. Literally silence, silent reflection, silent contemplation. Not to always give your thoughts, not to always give your feedback, but to be receptive. وَلِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُطِيعًا وَمُطِيعَةَ الْعَاقِلِ التَّوَاضُعُ وَكَفَى بِكَ جَهْلًا أَن تَرْكَبْ مَا نُهِيتَ عَنْهُ. And then he talks about the importance of someone in that state of silence and in that state of contemplation to be humbled, to be humbled by everything that surrounds us, like we talked about before. To be receptive. Then he gives him another piece of advice. This is my favorite one. This line is my favorite one from the whole passage, from this whole very lengthy conversation. He states, "Ya Hisham." Maybe you've heard this before. If not, well, you'll have the opportunity to think about it, inshallah. He states, "Ya Hisham." He's pulling up accurate translation as well. He states, "Ya Hisham, لو كان في يدك جوزة وقال الناس لؤلؤة ما كان ينفعك وأنت تعلم أنها جوزة ولو كان في يدك لؤلؤة وقال الناس أنها جوزة ما ضرك وأنت تعلم أنها لؤلؤة." It's a really nice line. He states, "Oh Hisham, if you had a nut in your hand and everyone said it was a pearl, it wouldn't benefit you. Since you know it's a nut." All right? Imagine you had in your hand $1 million, or you had a fake $1 million. You know you couldn't spend it because if you actually went to the store, they're going to know that there's no such thing as a $1 million bill. But everyone in the world told you that in your hand you have $1 million. But you know yourself there's not $1 million in your hand. How's that going to benefit you? You can't utilize it. You can't deposit it in the bank because everyone in the bank knows it's not $1 million. How's it going to benefit you? Is it going to benefit you if everyone thinks, if everyone perceives you to have $1 million in your hand? It's not going to benefit you. So he tells them, he says, if you have a nut in your hand and the whole world tells you that it's a pearl, how is that going to benefit you? It's not going to benefit you. And on the flip side, he tells him, "Oh Hisham, but if you actually had a pearl in your hand, but if the whole world told you, no, it's a nut, how does that bother you? Or why does that bother us?" Think about the way that we perceive others and the way that others perceive us and how that influences us and how that affects us. But he's trying to tell him something deeper than just that. When he's uttering these lines, he's telling him that if you have faith and if you have conviction, it doesn't matter what other people think that they have or think that you have. When you have conviction in God and you have God's support, nothing else matters. Because that's more precious than that $1 million bill. That's more precious than a pearl in your hand. And it does not matter what other people think about your practice, about your belief, about your faith. When you have it yourself, you should have the confidence to know that you know God. You should have the confidence to supplicate to him and to pray to him and to communicate to him and not worry about anything else. You understand? It can be read on so many different ways. I think it's a really powerful line. لو كان في يدك جلية أو هشام, that if you had in your hand a nut and everyone told you that it was a pearl, it wouldn't benefit you because you know it's a nut. But if you had in your hand a pearl and everyone told you it was a nut, it wouldn't harm you in any way because at the end of the day, you know it's a pearl. Ya Hisham. We continue with some more theological stuff. ما بعث الله أنبياءه ورسله إلى عباده إلا ليعقلوا عن الله فأحسنهم استجابة أحسنهم معرفة الله وأعلمهم بأمر الله أحسنهم عقلا وأقلهم أرفعهم درجة في الدنيا والآخرة. He states, "O Hisham, and know that God sends down his prophets for one role and responsibility, and that is to get people to train their intellects to know God." So he said, and the best of the servants are those who are most receptive or who are more inclined toward learning about their God, toward learning about their Lord. وَأَعْلَمَهُمْ بِأَمْرِ اللَّهِ وَأَحْسَنَهُمْ عَقْلًا. And those who know the most about God, they're the best. وَأَقَلَهُمْ أَرْفَعَهُمْ دَرَجَةً فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. And those who know, they're the best in this world and in the next. Because when you think about it, someone could say, how does someone who is the most knowledgeable about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how does that benefit her or him in this world? Again, when our minds and our preoccupations are on physical, tangible things, like wealth, like power, like our career, we're always going to compare ourselves to those who have more than us. But when we transition our mindsets to thinking about the most important thing in our lives is with regards to knowing and learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that path toward finding contentment is the only thing that concerns us. Contentment is with God and not with things. It's all about changing like our mindset. In the famous words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, he states that contentment is the treasure which never subsides. It's this wealth that keeps on giving. Because when you feel a sense of contentment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with yourself, you are always going to be comfortable. He continues, and he tells Hisham, فَلَا يَتَوَاضَ إِلَّا رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ. He said, there's not someone who is humble except that God raises him or her. مَنْ تَوَاضَ إِلَّا رَفَعَهُ. When you're humble in front of God, God will raise you in front of the people. So if that's what we're seeking, again, going back to when we had written down all of these 4 powers of the soul, we talked about, again, probably the most glaring one is, again, what is known as al-quwwat al-shahwiyya, this sort of bodily desire for food, desire for sleep, desire for wealth, desire for power, desire for sex, desire for all of these things. And over here, amongst those man malaka stuff, what are those things that so many individuals are inclined to? Is again power, is again inclined to authority. We love to be in positions of power. We love for people to look up to us and to respect us. It's almost innate. There's nothing wrong with that. But in his words, man tawada alillah rafa'ahu. The one who humbles himself in front of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise him or her in front of the people. You'll get that respect and you'll get that honor, but you will get it truly and be content with it once you submit to God. Who's like the big primary villain in the Qur'an? Probably give this example a million times, but Fir'aun, right? The Pharaoh. He's the sort of big bad guy in the Qur'an. He's mentioned, 70 some odd times by name and referred to close to 100 times within the Qur'an. He is so horrific, right? In addition to the genocide that he commits under his authority and under his rule. But that quality that God consistently mentions about him in the Qur'an is his pride and his arrogance, right? Such to the extent that he had everything. If we were talking about materialistic things, he had everything. He literally had people worshiping him. He would literally tell them, Ana rabbukumul a'la. God says in the Qur'an. This is what Fir'aun claimed. I am your great Lord, so worship me. But what bothered him? Moses. What did Moses have? Nothing. Right? From the eyes of like the materialistic life, he had a staff, right? And he had a small family. He didn't have anything in comparison. While Fir'aun literally had people worshiping him. Who was content? He couldn't sleep at night thinking about the fact that there are a small group of people who are not worshiping him, who are not following him, who are not being in utter and absolute submission to him. It's fascinating if you think about it. Even if you take a look at, the political scene in this country from our previous president. Instead of appreciating the fact that you are holding the highest office in the country, every single one of his remarks were about those who disputed him or who didn't support him, because it never brought him contentment. You could just see it, right? Till now, he's bitter. It's crazy if you think about it, that someone who holds that much authority and that much power, where's the contentment in their life? So, going back, he states, "Man tawada'a lillah rafa'ahu." The one who humbles himself or herself in front of God, God will raise them. And they're going to feel content with those few followers that they have, those few people who look up to them. وَلَا يَتَعَاظَمْ إِلَّا وَضَعَهُ اللَّهُ. And those who claim their greatness on their own, self-proclaimed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will lower them. And they'll never feel content. They'll always feel that people are walking on top of them. Because again, their pride and their ego and their arrogance makes them feel a certain way or makes them want to feel a certain way. And even though they proclaim and seemingly to maybe many other people wonder that why are they given the station? Individuals like that, again, they can't sleep at night. They're not comfortable. They're never going to be content with even the sort of seeming blessings that they have in front of them. So far, so good. Pretty basic ethical advices, right? But they're useful and good reminders, I think. He continues. Ya Hisham, Inna lillahi ala nasi hujjatain, hujjatun zahira wa hujjatun batina. فأما الظاهرة فالرسل والأنبياء والأئمة وأما الباطنة فالعقول. He states, O Hisham, surely God has given people two proofs, two evidences, two authorities. The first one is the external, and the second one is the internal. Those external guides that he gives us are the prophets and are the messengers and the imams. وَأَمَّا الْبَاطِنَ فَالْعُقُولِ. And that internal is this intellect again. So when you allow for them to be compatible upon one another, then we're able to grow. We are receptive to their instruction. We are receptive to their teaching and submissive. So far, so good. يا هشام كيف يزكو إن الله أمالك وأنت قد شغلت عقلك عن أمر ربك وأتأت هواك على غلبة الأخلاق. He states, O Hisham, you cannot perfect your deeds. You cannot perfect your actions. When your mind is, and this is important, when your mind is consistently being preoccupied with desires as opposed to the commands of God. So we talk about like these unique stations that like certain believers perhaps have the potential to reach. And I recognize that sometimes giving talks and whatnot, we give examples of, the Prophet used to pray this many prayers at night. And in the daytime, he was like really, really busy, like as the head of state and as the messenger and dealing with people's problems. And he also had a family and he had so many people to serve. And right. And sometimes people take a look and they say like, look at all of like these really lofty examples that like, Muslim clergy give, but like they're not even practical. So you want to think about like more smaller practical steps that we can take toward reaching those things. And over here, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he gives Hisham this good example. He tells him, how can you even start? How can you even start to think about your spiritual growth and progress when at the end of the day, how many times during the course of the day did you fulfill your own desire as opposed to what God desired for you? Just think about it. At the time of prayers, for instance, where was my mind? Was my mind in prayers or was it in eating? Just to give you an example. When I was sitting with my friend, was I thinking about God and having a meaningful conversation? Or instead was I gossiping or backbiting like someone else in the same room? I'm just giving you like sort of poor, crude examples to think about how many moments, how many interactions do we go through during the course of our days whereby it's completely void and negligent of the presence of God. That's what it's all about at the end of the day, right? It's about thinking and allowing for our day and our lives to be so God-centric, but that's really, really hard sometimes because our minds are so preoccupied with ourselves. Any questions? Am I talking too much? Should I continue? So like I said before, this is very lengthy and I just want to make sure that we're taking kind of the most important lines. Okay. Ya Hisham, in kana يغنيك ما يكفيك فأدنى ما في الدنيا يكفيك وإن كان لا يغنيك ما يكفيك فَلَيْسَ شَيْءٍ مِّنَ الدُّنْيَا يُغْنِيكَ. He states, O Hisham, if that which you have, virtually, if that which you have in front of you suffices you, you're okay with your status of living. You're okay with the money in your bank account or in your pocket. You're comfortable with your lifestyle at this given moment, and you're totally content and you're happy, then you are content with everything that you receive in this world. But if you see yourself always looking at your things and at your property and at your materialism and at your wealth and at your home, and you're comparing to others, and you're saying, I need a little bit more to feel that way, know that you're never going to be satisfied. We tell ourselves this all the time. Take a look, maybe even in your own experiences. How many of you used to work when you were in high school? Anybody? No? Oh man, all spoiled kids. Just joking. So if you work, okay, maybe you got wholesome jobs now, maybe, or you've had, right? Yeah. Sorry, bad joke. When you're young, you think that, if you have $10, right? That's it. You feel like you're the richest kid in the world, right? You feel like you are invincible. My children, a couple of months ago, they got a gift for Eid. And it was a gift card to Build-A-Bear. You guys know Build-A-Bear? The shop in the mall? Yeah, you guys know. I didn't even know that this place existed before. And all of a sudden, they got these $25 gift cards. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. So I took them. After many, many months, I ended up taking them to go to the Build-A-Bear workshop. And I was really excited because I got a chance to hang out with my kids and to make them really excited. And they had 25, they're both holding their gift cards. And I'm like, we're going to get some amazing stuffed animal. Only when we got to the register, we only had $50, but these bears cost $98, right? And they have no idea. They think that they got everything. And they're picking up everything. And then when I realized that this, the cash register sort of ringing up every single time, I told them you can't get these shoes, you can't get this hat, you can't get this dress, you can't get all of these things because this stuff is expensive. But they have this in their hand, and I tell them, this is worth $25, and they feel like $25 is everything to them. They don't know that it costs $25,000 to attend one class at NYU, right? So I'm telling them at that age, they're content with that, right? Think about the first time you got $1, you got a quarter, right? It makes you so happy, so excited. As you get older, right, you get your first paycheck in your sort of minimum wage job, right? You feel happy, you feel content, right? And you say, if I have a little bit more, I'd be so happy and content. But that cycle, it never ends. You say, if I had this salary, I'd be okay. If I lived in this neighborhood, I'd be okay. If I had that phone, I'd be content. If I had that car, I'd be happy. If I got that job, that's the only thing I want. Oh, Allah, I just want that job. No. When we think like that consistently, we're creating ourselves and digging ourselves into this really, really deep hole of never being content. I'm not saying it's bad to think, or it's not bad to want more or to want something nicer. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in any given moment, as Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he tells Hisham, he says, the issue is not whether or not you want something more. It's what suffices you and what brings you contentment. If you are thankful and you are content with what it is that you have, at this given moment, then you're going to be content with anything that you get, be it more, be it less. But when you are never content with what you have and you're always looking for something more, it's also, again, completely, according to Imam Musa bin Ja'far, that we're completely neglecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're removing it from the equation because we're forgetting that this is from Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is blessing for us. And that if we're always thinking about what might happen tomorrow, what we might get, we're completely negligent to the blessing that we have at this given moment. And we'll never be happy and satisfied in life. That's a dangerous thing to think about. Very, very dangerous thing to think about. How we can live a life of never being happy, never being content. It's very, very scary if you think about it. Let's continue. Maybe a couple of more minutes. يا هشام إن العقلاء زهدوا في الدنيا ورغبوا في الآخرة لأنهم علموا أن الدنيا طالبة ومطلوبة والآخرة طالبة لأنهم علموا أن الدنيا طالبة ومطلوبة والآخرة. He states, O Hisham, surely those who have intellect, the people of knowledge, they are those who abstain from the pleasures of this world. And their desire is for the next world. And they know that this world is what is seeking us. This world is what is running after us. And the next world is that which we should be seeking. In a famous narration from the son of Imam Musa al-Kadhim, Imam Ali al-Rida, was the 8th Shi Imam. He states that wealth, our decreed wealth, our rizq, or sustenance, is like that of a shadow. When you run after your shadow, what happens? It like runs away from you too. When you run toward your shadow, when you look toward it, it keeps on moving away from you. He says, but when you walk away from it, it follows you. So he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for you certain blessings. He has decreed for you all of these things. He has decreed for you your lifespan, decreed for you wealth, decreed for you family, decreed for you whatever He has decreed for us. When we're always preoccupied and thinking about it and running toward it, it's always running away from us. But on the flip side, if we don't think about it, and we know that we're working for God's decree, we're working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His decree is going to fall upon us wherever we may be, it's going to be something that follows us. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty beautiful. I'll conclude with maybe this anecdote. It's that one day that Imam Ali alayhi salam, Ali salamullah alayhi, he went to go and pray in the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa. It's a famous story. Maybe some of you have heard it before. It was in Medina, maybe it was in Kufa. Anyhow, he went to go pray in the mosque. And as he was entering into the mosque, he alighted from his horse and he asked someone who was standing outside. He said, my friend, he said, do you mind just watching my horse for a few minutes while I go and perform prayers? The guy said, no problem. He went inside and prayed. And a few moments later, he exits the mosque and he sees his horse, but he doesn't see the guy. And he realizes that his horse's saddle is no longer there. So he looks up, he says, okay, the guy left, probably took the saddle, no worries. He took the horse and he began to, ride back home. And on his way home, he stopped at like a saddle shop. I guess whatever, they had that back in the day, right? So at the same time, when he looks into the shop, he sees his saddle, the same one. So he asks the owner of the shop, he says, this saddle over here, how much is it? He says, X amount of money. He gives him the money. He says, like, when did you get this? He said, oh, a few minutes ago, there was like this guy who came and sold it. So he said, so after he already paid for it, he said, how much did, he sell it for? Let's say $50. He says, Ali tells the shopkeeper, he says, the man who sold you that saddle, I was going to tip him $50 just for watching my horse, for instance. What? So the guy says, what are you talking about? So he explains to him. He says that wealth was decreed for him. I had already made this intention that I was going to give him this gift for watching my horse, but he ended up getting it in unlawful means. At the end of the day, right, when we think about God, before we think about things, when we think about the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before we think about our own desires, everything that we want from this dunya, we're going to receive it. And we're going to be content with whatever it is that we receive. But when we're chasing, and when we remove Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the equation, we don't only mess up our lives in this world, but we also mess it up in the next world. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammadin.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.